Hi, in this video we'll be exploring how to use reporting rows to produce reports. Now, reporting rows allows you to design reports where each row of the report has different criteria. For example, here I have a profit and loss, and each row will have a different set of accounts. So they could be ranges of accounts, single accounts, or combinations of single accounts and ranges, and even like commands. So this allows us to produce quite a powerful report, and in addition to that we can add up sections. For example, here we have total revenue and cost of sales, and we have gross profit, which is total revenue minus cost of sales. So we can add up sections, and we can also expand and collapse regions. For example, here I've said just show all the accounts in these ranges, and it's automatically generated the rows for us. So reporting rows have a definition aspect, so we define the descriptions and the accounts that make up those rows, and then in addition to that we have the publisher, which then and query builder, which then allows us to take that criteria and do a query to get things like actual budget variance, for example. Reporting rows can be displayed in the web channel, and in addition to that they can also appear in Excel as well. So here's that same profit and loss report appearing in Excel. At the start of this video we'll first look at how this profit and loss report works. So we'll be going through the definition and also the query builder and how we got those actuals and budgets. Then after that we'll be looking at how the filter criteria works, so how we can define account ranges and individual accounts, and also do things like commands on the accounts, so that we best understand the flexibility of defining that criteria. Then we'll move on to building up a reporting rows report from scratch. Before we go into the example of the profit and loss report, I'd just like to draw some parallels between different styles of reports and reporting rows. So here we have a Excel workbook, and we're using aggregations to do a profit and loss. So here we have sales, and the accounts that make up that aggregation are defined on the right here. Now this style of report is very flexible, and it's similar to reporting rows. But where the difference is that with reporting rows we can define all the rows and the criteria that makes them up in the reporting rows definition window. So it leads to a more disciplined approach and allows us also to push those reports out to the web channel far more easier than if we had done them in Excel. For this reason, I recommend that reporting rows be used whenever you need to push out reports to the web channel, where each row of that report has different criteria. So let's start going through the example and slowly breaking it down. So here's the report, and you can see that the descriptions in the report match what's been defined here in the reporting rows definition window. So up the top here we have revenue, and then we have a line category, and the line category defines how the row is going to behave. For example, this is a header, and you can see that there's various other categories here for doing totals, expanding regions, hiding regions, etc. So the first one was revenue, which is a header, which has produced that, and if we click on it you can see that all the details for that row appear down the bottom. So we have two sections. One is the description area and one is the amounts area. So this is for styling, so we have bold, what type of color, etc. And if we're dealing with the numbers on the right hand side, what sort of color and style that you'd like to apply there. Just above that we have, for example, the description, which is going to display on the row, and the line category and the formula. So depending on the row category will require the formula. So if I just come down a bit to the total revenue, you can see that the line category is set to total, and then we've actually used the formula for this one. And the formula says we'd like to show a total that starts from line 1040 to before self. So there's various commands here. So we're saying we'd like to total everything from here to just before this row. Then we have a blank row, another header, and now we're getting into cost of sales. Now you'll see that the cost of sales has filter criteria. This is where we're defining the accounts that make up this particular row. See, the line category is left blank, so whenever it's left blank, we're assuming that we're going to go away, use the filter criteria, and return some sort of result. So for ranges, basically we have from this account to this account with a dot dot between them. And the two less than symbols on the front is a hint to the query engine that we have a list of accounts or codes that we're dealing with here. Okay, let's move further on down. So here we have more ranges of accounts, and then for shipment expenses we have a single account. Here we have another total, and notice that the total for this line has a line name, so it's called cost of goods sold. So these line names allow us to reference the value from another formula, another total further down, by the name instead of the line number. Of course we could use the line number, but as we edit and move things around in the report, you may find that it's better to actually give things names so that it's less confusing. So if I scroll down further, you'll see that there'll be another formula, for example the net profit, and here we have gross minus cost. So those are the names that we've defined further up. There is a rule though that you can only refer to things that are defined above, so you can't reference values that are defined after. Just going back up through this list again, you'll see that there's a hide line category here, and what we're doing here is saying that if there are any values that are 0, we'd like to hide them. So again, hide, and then we have the range that we'd like to refer to. So we're saying anything after the operating line name to, and if we leave that blank it means up to this point, or I could do also self. I'll explain about these keywords later. So if any particular line was all zeros, it would be hidden, and only the rows that had a value somewhere would be shown. Okay, I'll go back up to the top of this reporting rows and I'll explain about this expand section. So in the report you can see that we can collapse and expand the revenue section. Now the way this works is that we have a line category of expand, and here we have the range of accounts. So what the engine does is it takes the ranges of accounts or single values, it can be a combination of both, and it gets the code and the description and creates a row for each combination. So if we look at the description and the tooltip that appears over the description, you can see that we've got special keywords, and so we can control where the account code, or whatever the code it may be, appears. So if I didn't want the code and I just wanted the description, I'd put curly bracket description. And here we have another keyword for indenting. So in this way I could define a range of accounts and quickly have the engine fill in tens or even hundreds of account details, and then you would get the values for those particular rows. Now I'd like to explain the difference between total and subtotal. When you define a total, basically it's going to follow whatever's in the formula. For example, here I've got gross minus costs, but on occasions you could have a total and no formula. So what it will do in those scenarios is just look at all the values above it and total them up to the previous total. Now if there's subtotals in there, obviously it won't include those values. And subtotals do something similar in that, for example, this subtotal will take all the values above it up to where it hits another subtotal or total row. Okay, so this is where we define the reporting rows and the criteria and the descriptions. When it actually comes time to produce a report, what happens then is you go to Query Builder and you complete the second half of the process. So in Query Builder you would go to the system product, and then from the table list you would select reporting rows, and then from there you would choose the reporting rows design layout that you've designed over here. Once you've got that layout, you'll have the description and you'll have the filter criteria, which in this case defines the account rows, and then you would start building up these queries to go get the actual budget and variance, for example. Now it doesn't have to be actual budget and variance, it can be anything at all. But the idea is that you take the criteria and you pass it to this query and say, for example, go get the actual value for these accounts. So there's two parts of it, defining the reporting rows criteria and then using it in Query Builder to produce the report. So I'm just going to preview this, and you can see there's that same report. Now by default you would hide things like the filter criteria because you don't want to see them in the report, but you can unhide them and then have a look. So that criteria on the row is being passed to that subquery, which is getting the balance for that particular account code range. Now in addition to that, we've got account codes, but we also need generally something like a company or a business unit of some form, and maybe a period or a date range. So in the query I've defined a company and a period, which is appearing up the top here, and they're being also passed into the subqueries so that we get the account code range plus the period and that particular company. Let's have a look at the subquery now. So there's the actual, and we hit subquery, and for this example we're going to a sample Sharperlight database called sample accounting data, but it could be SAP Business One or Dynamics, for example. So here we've passed in the company and we're going to what appears to be the ledger, and we're getting actual values, and here is the criteria that we defined in reporting rows, for example this. So we're passing that in to the subquery, and it's looking at it and saying, well, that's a range of accounts, so it's working it out and doing exactly that. And of course we're passing in a period, and we're just getting the amount. If I looked at the budget subquery, here again we're passing in, making sure we're using the right company, and I've just changed this to go to the budget source instead of the actual, and again I'm looking at the same account and the period. So using this concept you can create a subquery to go to any system and pull out the values. Now they don't even need to be the same system, but in most cases they will be. For the variance, all that was done was a simple actual minus budget. So no subquery involved there, just minusing the actual and the budget. And of course the year to date, well, that is similar to the actual in its criteria, except that we've added a little hint here on the period to say on year start. So instead of just getting that period's value, we've gone back to the start of the year, and that way we get a year-to-date value. You can see that this profit and loss report also has a drill through, and of course these drill throughs that will go and show the transactions behind those accounts only appear where it makes sense. So we don't have it on the total row, just have it on these rows here. So if I click on those, so for example cost of sales, you'll see that the total will add up to that particular row. So how that was done is this expression here. So what this expression is saying is, if we've got some criteria, and only when we have some criteria, what we'd like to do is make a link to another report, and we're passing to that report. The report has filter criteria, of course, and which is company, period, and account, and so we're passing the correct company, period, and that criteria to that second report. So this style of drill through is a little bit different from the usual right click and drill through, because it's more targeted. We can actually show an icon on the report, and we can limit the scope of it. For example, if I did another one over the side, I could do the year-to-date drill through, and you could target just the budgets or the actuals, whereas the right click applies to the whole row. What I'd like to do now is explain how the filter criteria can be defined, because this is an important concept to really leverage the power of reporting rows. So remember, I was showing that there's the accounts down the side here for filter criteria A, and there was various ways we could define the ranges or single values. So what I have here is an Excel report, and I've listed the accounts and the amounts. So let's have a look at the query builder that defines this report. So here we have the company, and there's the accounts, so it's referring to cell D3. What I'd like to do is I'll just double click on cell D3, and I'll multi-select a number of accounts like this. Now notice that when I multi-selected a number of accounts, it generated this format for us, which is the less than, which tells the querying engine that we're going to have a complex list of accounts that are going to follow this. So you can see there's the commas. So what I'll do is I'll just go back in, and this time I'll say select, use code ranges as well, so this will turn into a range. And now we have comma, 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 and then we have the dot dot, which defines a range. Now I could type this in as well. For example, if I did something like this, 1010 and 1011, and then I could say, for example, 2000 dot dot to 3000, which would define a range. Of course, I could then continue that with more ranges. Now, in addition to doing ranges and single values, I can also do like commands. For example, if I was to add less than like, what I could do is say I would like to find anything that starts with 10 and then a percentage, and the percentage is like a wildcard, and then comma, for example, percentage 2. So anything that finishes in the number 2. So there's our 10, and there's the accounts that end in the letter 2. I can further extend this, for example, to say I would like anything that has 3 or 4 in the first position, and then anything after that. So now in the first position we have 3 or 4. So this is quite a powerful way of picking up segmented accounts. There is a Excel workbook that describes the different line categories and filter criteria and gives examples of these, and I'll show how this Excel workbook can be downloaded later. So here are some examples. So there's the simple ranges, and there's the like commands I was just showing you before. And if you're familiar with FRX style reporting, we also support the question mark type syntax as well. You can see here, here's a sheet that explains the different styles of doing formulas in reporting rows. So remember, we're discussing totals and the line names and the concept of totaling things to just before that row or just after that row. So here's an example of self to after net. So what that will do is go to net, and just after net start totaling up to self. Or if you look at the examples on the side here, we can do combinations of before self, after self, before the name of a line, after a name of a line, and even things like previous total, previous subtotal. Without using these special commands, you can, for example, do the name of a line up to, and then leave it blank, and in most cases it'll work out what's required. So these examples here show us basically totaling things in a particular range, but it's also possible to do things like adding or subtracting different sections of the report. And in addition to that, there are some basic functions. So we could count a particular all the items in a range, or get the average, the min, the max. But in most cases, you'll just be doing simple things like subtracting or adding sections together. A little bit more on line categories. We did discuss that we could create blank rows, header rows, totals, subtotals, and expands, but I didn't mention that there's another type of hidden row. So the one that I explained earlier would hide rows if all the values on that row were 0. There's also a type of line category called hidden, where you can do calculations in a hidden section of the report and maybe reference those from a total row, for example, if you want to do some calculations that need a bit of preparation up front before you throw it out to a total further on down. So that's the line category hidden. Okay, for this part of the video we're looking at how to build up the report from scratch. Now there's a number of ways to start with reporting rows. One is to create a shortcut to the Sharperlight md.applications.exe in the program folder. So that's the way I usually do it, or you can go to the shortcut menu and select reporting rows from there. If you don't have a shortcut to Sharperlight on your desktop, you can also go to Query Builder, and from there on the filter section you can right click and select reporting rows. This is an indirect way of getting to reporting rows, but it still is valid. So to start off a report, what we need to do is go to reporting rows, define the criteria that makes up the report, and then the second stage is to go to something like Publisher or Query Builder and actually use that reporting definition to go and get some values. For this part of the demonstration, what I'm going to do is replicate the top section of this profit and loss report, where we have revenue and cost of sales down to the gross profit section. So let's start off with reporting rows, and you can see I've created a number of reporting rows, and I'm going to select new. Now this code is going to be used later on when we refer to the reporting rows definition. I'm going to call this P&L T7, and the description will be profit and loss. So this is basically the description and the version number, etc. for the reporting rows section. We also have a line interval to control the numbering of the rows in the report. So here we have the rows, and what we can do is create rows and then assign the attributes to those rows. So the top section here is basically defining the type of line category, the filter criteria, the description, and then we have two sections at the bottom here, one for styling the description and the amounts on the right hand side. So let's start by clicking new, and there's our line number, And the description for the first row is going to be revenue. So I'm just going to paste that into description, and the line category is going to be header. So that's just going to make it a little bit larger than the normal row. Okay, so now we can start defining the criteria, and the first section that we want to define is going to be expanded area. So I'll click on new again, and I'll set the line criteria to expand. So what this is going to do is take our filter criteria, which I'll enter in now. So I'm going to filter criteria A, and I'm going to type in a account code range. So that's from that account to this account. Now because I've set it to expand, what it's going to do is find all the accounts in that range and create a row for each one. Now when it displays the description, it'll just drop in the description, but we can look at the tooltip on this description, start adding in our own hints as to how we want that description displayed. So for example, I could go code, I want the account code to appear here, and then a few spaces, and then the description. If I want indenting, I'd be tempted to do a few spaces in front of the code, but this doesn't always come out correctly when we publish to HTML. For that reason, there is a indent command in curly brackets, so we could do 1 or 2 or 3 of those to indent the code in the description. So there's our first 2 items, and under that we're going to put a total for the revenue. I'm going to do another row here, and the description will be total revenue. The line category will be total, and by default total will automatically add all the items above it. Or we could spell out the formula to say I only want the total in this particular range. But for this example I'm just going to leave it blank. Now if we look at the line name, later on when we use gross profit down the bottom here, we want to refer to the revenue total and include it in the calculation. So what I do, instead of referring to things by the line number, I refer to them by the name. So I'm going to call this sales. Right, let's move down now to the next section, which is cost of goods sold. Put that description in there, and this is another header, and now we can move into cost of sales. So I'll press another one. Now notice that I'm not setting the line criteria when we have some criteria that with accounts. By default it'll know that a blank line category requires some sort of value of the criteria. So there's our description, cost of sales, and I'll put in the account code range. Notice that I'm putting the less than symbol in, and now I'll enter in the account code range. Let's repeat the exercise for the next row, which will be raw materials. So there's raw materials, and now I'll go to the next row, which is components. I'll stop at components because it's just more of the same from here on. So there's components, and the filter criteria will be another set of account code ranges. Now I'm going to stop and do a total cost of sales row. So again, I'll press new and copy in the description, and the line category for this will be total. And for the line name, I'm going to call this COGS, so cost of goods sold, just an abbreviation. So later on at the bottom we're going to do a profit and loss, which is sales minus COGS. For this total, if I leave the formula blank, it's just going to total everything up to the previous total. Or I could do something like this, after sales to self, for example. So everything after sales up to itself. There's our basis for a report. What we could then do is go through and set the colors. So for example, I could set that to be yellow for that revenue section, and I'll do the same for the amounts on the right hand side, and then come down to cost of goods sold and do something similar to that. So yellow, yellow and yellow. And then for the profit and loss, I'll just do another section here, and it's going to be total. Now if I could put a blank row between these two just to space it out a little bit more, but I'll just have them one after the other. So profit, gross profit. So I'll put that in there. And the formula for this is going to be sales minus COGS. And now there's quite a few different types of formulas we can do that include even min, max, average, those sorts of things, but in most cases you'll probably just be doing this minus that, or a particular row plus that row, and they must be above the formula that you're working on. Okay, for this section here I'm going to make the font white and the background dark green on both sides, and that's white. And here we've got how we want the lines to appear. So I could put see the top and the bottom. I'll put a single or two lines on the top and bottom. So I'm just going to say single line, top, bottom on both sides. And there was one thing I forgot about the expand section here. So we're saying expand all the accounts in this range. And when we do that, we also want this expand and collapse button to appear. So if we set the line category to expand, we just need to say how we want the default behavior to be. So we could expand and have it collapsed by default or shown by default. So we'll just select expand there. Okay, so now we've got a basis for a report. What we need to do now is go to Publisher and start consuming that definition. So I'm going to start up Publisher now. So in Publisher, I'll click on New. I'll give the report a code. I'll call it row and P&L T7. And the title of the report will be Profit and Loss. From there we go to the query. This is an important part to remember. When we go to query, what we'll do is start in the product system, and the table will be reporting rows. So that just by doing that, it'll bring up all the different reporting row attributes and automatically output the important ones for us. What we need to do then is select the reporting row definition that we're after. So here's our reporting row PLT7 that we were creating just before. So we'll set that filter criteria to pick the correct reporting rows definition. Okay, so if I preview the report at this stage, it's just showing the descriptions that we've created, and we don't have any actual budget variance columns yet. So that'll be the next step. Now, the actual budget variance also have a concept of a company and a period, and normally we'd pass those through, but we'll just create the query and hard code those for the time being. So on the outputs, right click and select Add Subquery. You'll notice that the aggregation mode should be aggregation, and then we select the product that we'd like to get the values from. So in this case it'll be sample accounting data, so I'm selecting that, and there's our company. So I'm just going to leave that hard coded for the time being. Then I'm going to select the table that I'd like to pull the values from. So this is going to be actual and budget summary in this case. If you're using another system like SAP Business One or Dynamics GP, of course the table will be different. So I've selected that, and because it's actuals I'm after in this example, I'm going to set the source to be actual. Then we've got the account ID. Now this we have defined in reporting rows as either a range or lots of accounts. So for that, instead of hard coding it to account, what we're going to do is click on this little drop down, and here we've got a list of things that we can reference, and you can see that it's got criteria A in the list. So we'll set that account to be whatever's in criteria A. We also need a period for this example, and for the time being I'm just going to hard code that to a particular period. So I'm going to say that just for now June 2015. And then finally we bring out our amount. So you can see the sum there. Good. So I'll press OK. So there's our subquery. I'll preview it and you can see there's our values coming back. Now I've made a mistake with some of the styling. I've got the color around the wrong way, so I just need to fix that up. And so I'm going to come back to the revenue and just fix up, that's the font color, so I'll set that back to black, set that to yellow, and the same for the cost of goods sold, black and yellow. If I want to make the font larger, there's also the size there for changing the font size. Okay, so I can click apply on the reporting rows and then come back to Query Builder and then just refresh the screen. So it's a good idea to have reporting rows open while you're working on the report, so you can make adjustments as you go. The first thing I notice about the revenue is that the sign of the amount is actually the wrong way around, so I need to reverse sign that amount. So if I come back to reporting rows and I look at that expand section, you can see that I can reverse sign the amount. So I'm just going to click on that and then come back to our report, and now the sign is reversed. What I'll do now is just rename that column so that we get actual up the top there and then view it in the web channel. So I'll change the description for the query, subquery, to actual, press OK, apply, and then we can come up to the link to the report, copy that, and then paste it into the browser. So this is the link to that report. Now currently it's still showing the report code, so we could change that and get a different reporting rows layout, but I'm just going to submit that as it is. And you can see that I've made a mistake with the expand region, and that it's put a expand, open and collapse on every row. So I just need to go back and fix that up. So let's have a look at the expand section, and I put this expand option on the wrong row. So that's being expanded, but we need to know how far up we need to open and to put the expand and collapse icon on. So we want to put that expand and collapse icon on the revenue row. So we need to go to revenue, and that's where we put the expand. So we can say collapse or expand by default. So I'm just going to say expand on revenue and refresh that. What I'd like to do now is just add a blank row just above revenue, and also set those as bold so we can see how we can insert rows. So if I go up to the top row, you can see that there's various icons on the side here. So I could insert a row around revenue and then move it up above revenue. And if for whatever reason when we're producing this report we find the line numbers need to be spaced out again, we could click on renumber, for example. So I've created a blank row above revenue, and I'm just going to set that to blank just to spell it out, and I'll come to revenue and set that to bold, and also cost of sales to bold, and gross profit to bold, and I'll make that a larger font size to boot. So I'll press OK now and preview that report. What I'd like to do now is also set the width of the description column so that it's always a particular width. So let's go to Publisher now, and we'll edit the report, and there's our description column. What I want to do now is set that to be a particular width. So I'm going to Formatting, Output Options, Formatting, and here we've got the width. So by default I could always make it 400 pixels wide. So I'm just going to press OK, apply, and come back and view that report again. So there's 400 pixels wide for the description area. The next step will be to fix up the filters so that we can select the company and the period and have those passed down to actual and later on budget. So let's go back into Publisher. So for filters, currently we've got the report code, which we don't want the user changing, so we're going to right click and hide that. Now to create a concept of a company and a period, what we need to do is right click on the filter area and select other, and then one of these items in the list. Now a company is generally text, so I'm going to select text. So this has created a filter that we can pass down to the actual query. I'm going to right click on it and change the description to be company, and the important step here is to also set the name. So I'm going to change the name of the filter to also be company. So there's the name, and by default I'll set it to MIT. Now you can see MIT is appearing in the from and to. We really want the user to select one company, not a range of companies, because that would make sense. So let's go into the options on that filter, and we're going to say by default they can only enter in a single company, so that's single values only. Okay, so we have the company. The next is to create a period. So I'm selecting right click, other, and this time I'm selecting period. I wouldn't select text or number because they could enter in anything and it would cause errors later on. But if I select period, it's going to make sure that whatever they enter in conforms to the period restrictions. So period. So it's already set a good description for me, and the name is also period. If I wanted it to default to the current period, I could use a keyword like period. You can see it's set it to 2015 August by default. The user wouldn't have to enter in or change the period that if you ever hard coded it. Now just like before, we want to set that to single ranges, so I'm just going to set single values only, and it's going to default to period. Good, so now we've got the company and the period. We can now pass those into the actual subquery. So the actual subquery is referring to the criteria A at the moment for the account code ranges. So let's edit that. And now we're going to hook up the company. So currently it's still hard coded to MIT, and if I click on the drop down list, there's our company. The @ symbol represents a filter in the parent query, and the percentage refers to an output in the parent query. So let's go at company, and if I come down to period, let's synchronize that, so that'll be at period for the from and the to. Good. So now that we've done this, whatever the filter criteria is set to is going to be reflected in that actual value. So I'll press OK now and come back to the web, and we'll test that. So I'll just refresh the report in the web. There's our MIT, there's our period, and what I could do is I'll just change it to period -1p, which is going to the previous period. So there's a gross profit of 52. So if I go back to the previous period, 56, instead of doing this layout, I could also just type in a period number up there, and that'll suffice as well. So that appears to be working. The next step would be to create the budget and the variance. So let's go back to the report now and add those two extra columns. So I'm going to edit the query. Now what I could do is right click and clone that actual and just modify the query somewhat to get the budget values, but for the exercise what I'll do is recreate it from scratch. So again, add subquery. The mode is aggregation. I need to select the product I'd like to get the data from. So in this case it's sample accounting data. The company will be the same as the parent company, and the table in this case is going to budget summary. Now each column that you add to reporting rows with subqueries, they could be to any system at all. They don't even have to be the same table or even the same product. So it can add to some quite interesting reports. The source in this case, instead of actual, I'm going for budget, and the criteria for the accounts I'd like to get from criteria A. So you may have worked out already that there are more than one criteria. So you could have criteria A, you could have criteria B, C, other, etc. So if you've got some more complicated requirements, you could use criteria A and B, and maybe use only criteria A in one query and criteria B in the next query, for example. And that way you could align accounts across companies, for example, with a mapping type structure. So there's our criteria A, and we need to add in our period. So I'm adding that into the filter area and synchronizing that with the parent. And just as we did before, we're getting the amount, which is being summed. So there's our budget column. I'll just rename that. I'll change the description for that subquery to be budget. And now we're ready to do a variance, which will be budget minus actual. Now when we do our expression for the variance, it's going to refer to the names of actual and budget, and at the moment they're not very friendly, so let's change the names of those subqueries to be actual and budget. Now the names have been changed. We'll create the expression, so right click, add expression, and from the current row list you can see all the outputs that currently exist. So I can double click on budget and then select minus actual. If I wanted to change the formatting of this column, I could go to formatting and play around with currency codes, etc. But I'm just going to leave that as it is, and then I'll change the description to be variance. If we preview that, now we have our variance column, and just as we did before, we can click apply and come back to the web and see how that looks like now. So we've got our actual budget variance. Now if I look at the company filter up the top here and I select the drop down list, you can see that it's not being very helpful in giving me a list of valid companies that I need to enter in for this report. So I'd like to fix that up by defining my own lookup of valid values for the company. Also, I'd like this to be a drop-down list so that I can quickly select from the list. So let's have a look at that. I'll come back into Edit Query, and here's our company, and it's just hard-coded to MIT at the moment. I'm going to go into the options, and on the right-hand side here, you can see that you can create a subquery to define the valid values for this particular item. So I'm going to click on Subquery, create subquery, and at the moment it's setting that to reference. I'm going to change that product to go to my sample accounting data system again, and the next thing I'm going to look for is a table that will give me a list of companies. So I'm just going to do a search in the table list for something that'll give me a company listing. So here's one called company and company settings. So I'm going to try company, and this looks like the right sort of table. Preview that, and sure enough it's given me a list of the company codes and even their descriptions. Because we're going to make this a drop down list, it's just going to show the valid company codes. So I've defined my criteria for getting companies. The interesting thing about this concept of subqueries driving filters is that you could put extra criteria in there to say, look, if it's this set of conditions, don't show all the companies, show a subset of companies or a subset of analysis codes depending on what they're doing. Right, I'm going to press OK now, and we've got a few more options here that control how that subquery behaves. So you'll see that by default it says a filter use subquery values and no lookup is displayed, which is not what we're after. We're after the bottom one, which is basically that subquery defines the lookup. So we select that and press OK, and OK, apply, and we'll come back. So currently it's blank, so we need to reset that company. And there's the list of companies, but it's not a drop down yet. We want to set that as a drop down. So we'll come back, edit, go to company options, and we'll say show filter values as drop down pick list, and we'll default it to MIT by default, and press OK, apply. If we refresh the report now, we get a drop down list of companies. Alright, to the next stage, I'd like to add a drill through, so an icon just in front of the actual. So the idea is that we click on the icon and we'll show all the transactions behind that actual amount. So in the case of cost of sales, there was a few accounts that made that amount up, so we click on the icon and we can show those. So in the real example, the first example, you can see there's the icon, we click it, and that balance should match the row that we clicked on. And up here we've got the criteria that was passed through to this report. So we have the company, the account codes, and the period. Otherwise it's not going to balance. There's two ways of doing drill throughs. One is that you right click on the report and you create a drill through that way. This one with the icon is passing the criteria through to a separate report, and that's the pattern that we're going to use here. I'll go to Publisher now and show you what the drill through report looks like. It's a published report just like any other. So if I go to row drill, which is the drill through report, and have a look at the query, you can see it's going to the same table and actuals, and the important part here is that it's got a number of filters. Now these filters like company ID, the account codes, the period, we want to override those and set them to whatever row that we're on in the starting report. So each one of these filters has a name. For example, com ID is the company, ACC ID, and per num. So those are the ones that we want to override when we create the drill through. And then of course we're going off and showing more details, more columns than existed in the parent report. Okay, so that's the drill through report, and its group and code is displayed there. And you can see that we've set a few options like submit by default and collapse after submit, so that the user doesn't have to wait and click on submit. It'll just go straight through. Alright, so we've seen the row drill report. Let's hook up our example to that report. So we'll come back to T7, open up the query, and here's our report with actual budget variance. And just before actual, I'll do a right click and add expression. Now there's various templates in expressions, and the one that we're after is under HTML, but I'm just going to do a search on report and we'll find it that way. So here's a link to another report using image icon. That's the template that we want to use. So I'm just going to double click on that, and it's got most of the things are filled out for you. All you need to do is change the report code. So there's our report code, and then the filter criteria. Those are the two things you need to change. So the report code was row.drill. So I've just changed that. Next is the filter criteria. Now for the filter criteria, basically you've got the keyword FLT, which stands for filter, and then you've got the name of the filter you want to override. And this _2 is the to value, so you've got from and to. So that's the name of the filter you want to override, and that's the value you want to set it to. So the first one I wanted to override was the com ID for company, and the value I want to get from this report, so I'm just going to look for that, which will be filter company. So in this report it's called company, but in the drill through report it's called com ID. What I like to do is set the from and the to, just to make sure, even though the target report may only have a single value, it's good practice just to set both of them all the time to avoid errors. Okay, so we've got our from and to company set to company, and I'm going to copy those, and the next thing I'm going to set is the period. So that was called per num in the drill through report, and here I need to set the period value, so I'm just double clicking on that to get the period, and I'll do the same for the to value as well. So per num, and we'll reference the period again. So there's our company and period set. Next is the account criteria. So in the drill through report, that was called ACCID. So that's the from value. The criteria for the accounts is actually on the row, and here it is here, criteria A. So that has a percentage, not the @ symbol. So we'll set that for the from and the to. If we get any of these names wrong, obviously the drill through is not going to balance to the same amount that was on the parent report. But there are ways of validating that. So now I've done the report code and all the filter criteria. I can press OK. It's just telling us here that should be HTML. And generally what I do with drill through icons is I just leave the description blank. Press OK, apply, and we'll come back into the web channel, refresh the report, and view the icon. So everything went well, and we do have the icon there. Notice that the icon is appearing in places where it doesn't really make sense, so we will go back and add some more criteria to remove it from those places. And if I go to cost of sales and click on the icon there, you can see that it drilled through and it is balancing. So that's 4,085, 4,085. And if I open up the filter criteria, you can see that there's the company and the account code and the period just as it was defined in the parent report. And if I had misaligned any of those names, the filter criteria would be blank. It wouldn't have married up. So that's a way you can work out if your drill through is hooked up correctly to the parent. Now that we've ascertained that the drill through is working correctly, we can now add some extra criteria to the expression to remove the icon where the rows don't make sense. So I'll come back into Query Builder in Publisher again, and here's our expression that does the drill through. I'm going to double click on that, and what we know is that if it's a header or a total row, it doesn't have any criteria A defined. So you can see here there's criteria A, and there's nothing defined for blank. It's only defined when we've got actual values where it makes sense to do a drill. So what I'm going to do is, around this drill through link, is put a if condition to say that if criteria A is blank, do nothing, otherwise show the link. So we do that by putting in a IIF statement, which is if, and then I'm going to refer to the current row and select criteria A. So I could say not equal to blank like this, but in this case I'm going to say if it's equal to blank, comma, I'm going to display blank. Otherwise, so that it's another comma, I'm going to do the link, and then I'm going to do a closing bracket. So the syntax for if statements is if criteria, and then you've got the true condition and the false condition. So let's press OK now, and we'll go back to the report, and we should see those icons disappear except where there's actual values to drill on. That basically finishes the build the report from scratch part of this video. What I'd like to do now is show you how you can reuse this report not only in the web channel but also in Excel and also other places like Report Designer. So what I'll do now is I'll start up Excel and create a new report. Now for this to work you need the latest version of Sharperlight 3.1, and what I'm going to do is from the ribbon select Sheet. So I'll just come down a little bit and select Sheet. I've started a little bit lower down in the sheet because I want to parameterize the company and the period. So I need a little bit of room above the report to do that. Now I could redefine the report again using system, reporting rows, and then define my subqueries, etc., just as we've done before. But since we already have a report in Publisher that's complete, what I'm going to do is right click and say import query from Publisher, so we don't have to redo that report again. So I'll come down and I'll look for the report that we started this video with, and I'll double click on that, and here's that report. Now it does have a drill through icon which doesn't work in Excel, so I'm just going to remove that and just leave the actual budget variance. So if we preview that, yes, that's our report, and I'll press OK and it'll go back into Excel. The next part is to parameterize it so we can change the company and the period. So I'm just going to come back up to the top here and say company, and then MIT, and the period I'll set to 2015-06 for example. So I'm just going to parameterize this report now. So I'll come back to the formula and edit the query, and where we have company I'm going to double click back on the spreadsheet, and you can see now it says equals C2 for that cell reference, and the period we're going to get from this cell here, and press OK, and the report is refreshed. If I was to double click on the company, I could change the company to a different one, and as long as your account's married up, this particular company doesn't marry up, so we're not getting any values, but if they did we would get the same report for a different company. Now notice that when I changed the company, that the accounts, because they were a different structure, we didn't get any values. This is the times when you can consider using things like criteria B and C. The idea is that depending on certain criteria, you may switch to using criteria B or A, depending on which company you're dealing with. So it can lead to some very interesting reports. Now we'll have a look at how we can display this reporting rows using a PDF rendition. So if we come back to Publisher, and this is the sample report that we built from scratch, by default, if we go to Report and Default Type, it's going to be rendered as HTML in a table. Now what we can do is define our own layout and also say render it as PDF, and that's for example Page PDF. On the Page tab we can edit the layout of that report using the designer. Now the designer has a similar concept to Active Reports or reporting services, where you can specify the column widths, the fonts, the size and colors of things right down to the very pixel. So if I just preview this without modifying the auto-generated layout, you can see it's pretty much the same as what we had before, and we can go in further edit this. So I'm just going to close that and go with the default layout, and if I now run the report in the web channel, now that I've set it to Page PDF, what we'll do is get a PDF rendition of that report. In closing, reporting rows allows you to define reports that you normally can't easily define in the web channel, and these reports are usually things like a profit and loss style of report, where each row of the report has different criteria. The process for creating reporting rows is to define the criteria that makes up the report in reporting rows, where you have the description and the codes that make up that particular row, And then the second part is to then use something like Query Builder or Publisher, where you reuse that report definition and start generating some subqueries to then go off and get the values based on the criteria that's passed to it. That's been an overview of reporting rows.